We found a stone circle that hummed when we stepped inside. The forest had been quiet for hours, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. The fog was thick, crawling along the ground in pale ribbons, curling around the trunks like deliberate fingers. Our flashlights cut weak beams through it, illuminating only fragments of moss, gnarled roots, and the occasional fallen branch. The air smelled damp, rich with decay and cold earth, and every inhale carried the faint metallic tang of something I couldn't identify. I had thought we were lost. I thought the fog, the low-hanging clouds of mist, and the twisted trails were playing tricks on our minds. Then, there it was, a clearing, round, perfectly symmetrical, with stones that rose like sentinels from the forest floor. Each monolith was irregular in shape, yet they formed a precise circle. The surface of the stones glistened as though wet, though the rain had long since stopped. The fog drifted inwards, as if the circle itself drew it, and I realized with a shiver that the space inside seemed unnaturally still. When we stepped inside, the humming began. Not audible at first, just beneath perception, a vibration in our bones and teeth, like standing over a great subterranean engine. The stones seemed to resonate with something we couldn't see. I swallowed hard. It wasn't just a vibration. It was a pulse, deliberate, as if the circle had a heartbeat older than the hills. The moment we entered, time began to feel wrong. Shadows stretched and contracted at odds with our movements. The fog shifted with intent, curling around our legs, moving against the breeze. I turned my head and thought I glimpsed shapes moving beyond the mist. Figures crouched, thin, tall, impossibly silent. They were never in the same place twice. My friends laughed nervously, though the sound was thin and strained. I tried to match their tone, but my voice felt foreign, echoing back to me with subtle distortion, as if it were filtered through some unseen cavern. Every footstep in the moss seemed louder inside the circle, each crack of a branch reverberating, though outside the circle, the forest remained still. The humming intensified when we stepped closer to the tallest monolith, one that seemed carved with lines too precise, too intentional to have been human-made. I touched the stone. It was cold, impossibly so, and I felt the pulse beneath my fingers as if it were synced with my heartbeat. I wanted to pull away, but I couldn't. Not entirely. Something in the circle's rhythm anchored me, held me in place. My vision trembled, and for a fraction of a second, I swore I saw the stone's surface ripple, like water disturbed by a drop. And then it was still again, unchanged, but I knew it had moved. The forest outside seemed to bend around the circle. A tree I remembered distinctly, a birch with a split trunk, appeared where it shouldn't have been. Another vanished entirely. The trail we had followed to reach the clearing no longer existed, swallowed by fog that moved with uncanny purpose. My friends' faces flickered in my peripheral vision. For a heartbeat, one of them looked impossibly young, their features shifting as though they had aged backward. Then their face returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the memory of the alternate version. Whispers began next. I thought it was my imagination at first. The wind through the trees, the forest speaking. But the words weren't carried on the wind. They came from inside my mind, echoes of my own thoughts twisted into unfamiliar syntax. One repeated insistently, "Remember the stones." Another, "They wait beneath." I spun, trying to locate the source, but no one spoke. My friends stared at me with wide eyes, and their own whispered thoughts seemed to echo back to them, distorted, incomprehensible. Time fractured. I lost count of minutes or hours. When I glanced at my watch, the hands spun backward, then forward, as though the circle were testing my perception. I tried to take a step away from the central monolith, and the clearing expanded subtly, impossibly, like a memory warped. The fog thickened, moving in waves that suggested deliberate intent, obscuring and revealing parts of the circle in patterns I couldn't rationalize. The stones themselves seemed aware. The hum changed pitch, synchronizing with my heartbeat. The tallest monolith shivered slightly when I touched it, and I felt the vibration spread through the soles of my feet, up my legs, into my chest. A memory I had not thought of for decades flooded me. The way my father had spoken to me in the dark, his voice carrying urgency I had long forgotten. Then, immediately, a memory I had never had. A childhood in a village that didn't exist, faces of people I'd never met, all observing the circle. The forest outside remained silent, but I knew I was being watched by something vast, beyond comprehension, that had recorded not just my life, but possibilities I had never lived. I tried to rationalize, told myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, the effect of the fog and isolation. But rational thought faltered with every tremor beneath my feet. The ground pulsed subtly, as though the circle were not just stones on soil but an extension of something beneath. And beneath, I realized, there was intelligence, patience, ancient and indifferent. It had been waiting. For us, for me, for all who wandered too far into its territory. I wanted to leave, but the edges of the circle were fluid. The forest around it was not as it had been. When I tried to step out, the path shifted subtly, deliberately. One of my friends reached the edge and vanished into fog that moved against them, as if the air itself had weight. I lunged to call them back, and the whispering inside my skull shouted warnings I couldn't parse. The humming rose in volume, though no air moved. I realized the circle wasn't resonating just with sound. It was resonating with thought. It knew we were here. It knew our memories, our fears. The pulse beneath us was not merely vibration. It was the rhythm of awareness itself, slow and inexorable, ancient beyond measure. I looked at the stones again. Patterns I had not seen before etched themselves into the monolith surfaces as if carved by the fog itself. Spirals, eyes, geometric shapes too precise for natural formation. They weren't markings, they were instructions, thresholds. And I understood, suddenly, with a terror that made my stomach drop, that the circle was a doorway. A threshold into something older than humanity, older than the hills, older than the trees themselves. The fog thickened into a near-solid wall. Whispers intensified, layering over one another, some mimicking my own thoughts, others forming phrases that felt like commands. The forest had disappeared, replaced by a void that shimmered with subtle movement beneath the fog. And the stone circle hummed, not as a boundary, but as a lure. It wanted us inside. It wanted something from us, though I could not understand what. I glanced at my friends. Their faces flickered like candlelight, shifting between age and youth, fear and calm, recognition and alienness. One of them, the one who had laughed nervously before, turned to me and said words I knew I had thought myself. "We belong here." The humming intensified. The ground beneath me pulsed faster, in sync with my chest. I wanted to resist, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, as though drawn toward the center of the circle. I tried to remember the trail, the path that had led us here, but memory had been rewritten. The fog obscured it, and the forest beyond it had ceased to exist. The circle was all that remained, and I realized then that we had not found the stones. They had found us. They had waited through centuries, patient and silent. We were marked now, bound, and the threshold had already begun to pull us inside. I do not know if we will ever leave. I only know that the hum continues, faint but unrelenting, echoing in my skull. And I understand, with a cold certainty, that once one steps inside, the circle does not merely contain you. It records you, observes you, integrates you into a memory older than the forest itself. We are part of it now, and it waits. The trees bent away from something walking between them. I noticed it first in the periphery, a subtle shift of the forest that made my stomach tighten. We had been walking for hours, my friends and I, the fog thick and low along the ground, coiling around roots and rocks like living smoke. The path was indistinct, but we had pressed forward, drawn by the thrill of isolation, the strange calm of a forest untouched. Then the trees themselves began to react. It wasn't wind. There was no breeze. The leaves hung suspended, and the trunks leaned outward in smooth, deliberate arcs, creating empty channels through the wood. Something moved in those spaces, vast, impossible, and utterly unseen. The forest fell silent. Every bird, every insect, every whisper of wind ceased, as if the world itself had held its breath. My flashlight beam shivered over the fog, cutting through the white in thin arcs. I stepped carefully, heart hammering, and the ground beneath my boots seemed softer, subtly vibrating in a rhythm that matched the tremor in my chest. The air smelled of damp earth and something older, something metallic and faintly bitter that shouldn't have been there. I swallowed and tried to rationalize. Some animal, maybe, though nothing this large could move without sound. But then I noticed the shadows. They were wrong, not cast by the trees or my light, but bending against it. Long, impossibly stretched shapes that clung to the edges of the fog and twisted around the trunks. I blinked, and the shapes shifted slightly, always just beyond comprehension. My friends laughed nervously, but even their voices felt distant, altered, echoing in ways that did not match their mouths. I reached a fallen log and paused, shining the light along the ground. The reflection of my own eyes stared back at me in a puddle, distorted. One eye seemed older, lined, familiar and not familiar at once. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I turned sharply, almost certain I would see the source of the bending trees. There was nothing, yet the air seemed to pulse with awareness, a presence that was patient, indifferent, ancient. We pressed forward. Each step seemed longer than it should have been. The fog thickened around our knees and then our waists, curling with intent, forming barriers that were both there and not there. My memory slipped. I thought I remembered a branch I had stepped over, but it wasn't where it had been, or perhaps it had never been at all. The path we had walked moments ago appeared behind us, yet slightly altered. A rock was now smooth where it had been jagged. A moss patch shifted, darker and more saturated. The forest was rewriting itself with every step, and the thing between the trees moved silently, patiently. I caught my reflection again, in a puddle that should have only mirrored the sky. But the reflection was not mine alone. There was a subtle second image layered over mine. A figure crouched low, shoulders hunched, indistinct but unmistakably observing. I spun, shining the flashlight into the fog. Nothing. Just trees bending away, leaves still, and the faintest ripple in the mist, like water disturbed by something massive passing just beyond sight. Whispers began next, soft at first, brushing against thought. I could not tell if they were carried by the wind or my own mind. Words I had been thinking, long-forgotten memories, private fears, echoed back to me in tones I did not recognize. "You are not supposed to be here," one voice said, or at least I thought it did. My friends stopped. They felt it too. Their breaths caught, uneven, visible in the fog, though the air was not cold. I tried to shake off the fear, to convince myself it was stress, isolation, fatigue. But rational thought fractured. A tree I had passed only minutes before appeared ahead, though the path should have turned. Branches twisted as though reaching for us, yet recoiling, forming a corridor around nothing. And in the spaces between, I sensed volume, mass, presence, the unmistakable weight of something observing. Not hunting, not angry, simply aware. The ground vibrated again, faintly at first, and then stronger, a slow, steady thrum. Each pulse felt connected to the rhythm of my chest, as if my heartbeat were being mirrored, studied. The fog shifted in correspondence, rolling around the trunks in waves, sometimes revealing a glimpse of shapes too massive for the forest, too precise to be natural. My peripheral vision caught them again. Shadows stretching at impossible angles, bending the geometry of the trees. And then they vanished, leaving only the impression of movement, a gap in the natural world. I remembered an old story, whispered by locals about forests that were older than memory. Tales of sentient woods that observed intruders, that altered perception, that recorded trespassers. I laughed bitterly. It was just a story, a warning. But the laugh felt wrong, echoed back at me in the fog, warped. I blinked. My own reflection now showed my friends' faces superimposed over mine, expressions of calm, panic, and incomprehensible alienness layered together. The forest was not passive. The bending trees were not random. The entity between them was aware, colossal, indifferent, its movements imperceptible yet transformative. Every step we took was recorded, mirrored, altered. We could not leave without it noticing, and I felt the weight of that notice pressing against the fog, pressing against my thoughts. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed. I no longer trusted time. The sun would never rise here. The fog never thinned. The forest shifted subtly in ways that disoriented me, forming corridors and clearings that had never existed, or perhaps had always existed beyond comprehension. Whispers repeated, sometimes in unison, sometimes in echoes layered over my own thoughts. Remember. Watch. Wait. We reached a clearing, or what I thought was a clearing. The ground hummed faintly beneath our feet. I stepped forward, and the trees leaned further away, forming a perfect arc around something I could not see, could not hope to see. The fog moved inwards, pooling at the center, shimmering faintly. I realized, with a chill that hollowed my stomach, that the forest itself was a threshold. The thing walking between the trees was not hunting. It was observing, cataloging, patient beyond measure. It had existed long before humans, and it would persist long after us. I turned to my friends, but their forms flickered in the fog. One moment familiar, the next warped, their features elongated or compressed, layered with reflections of faces I had never seen. I realized that stepping here, into this space, into this forest, had marked us. The entity had taken note. We were recorded now, integrated into its awareness, our memories already warped. I tried to speak, to call a decision, a plan, but the whispers coalesced into one voice inside my skull. You are seen. You are remembered. You belong to the forest now. I looked up. The trees leaned further, bending away from nothing, yet their trunks formed impossibly straight lines toward the fog. And I understood the forest itself was alive, and the thing between the trees was not a creature in the way we comprehend creatures. It was something vast, indifferent, ancient, moving through the world as a pattern, a force. It had noticed us, and it would wait, always. I do not know if we will leave. The path we came from has vanished, rewritten into something alien. The fog coils like fingers, the trees bend with purpose, and every shadow, every reflection, every whisper confirms the presence of something beyond comprehension. We are being observed, and the forest remembers.